Admiral Jorvac sat in his command chair, fingers drumming impatiently on the armrests as he observed the human child through his holofeed. The sleek, black surface of his alien vessel surrounded him in silence, the glow of holographic screens and alien symbols the only signs of life in his otherwise sterile surroundings. His species, the Xelfar, had long considered themselves the pinnacle of technological prowess. To them, humanity was a mere curiosity, an infant species barely capable of comprehending the stars, let alone navigating them. But the humans had intrigued the High Command, especially their technology. How could a species that had only recently discovered space travel already be producing such advanced simulators? These virtual reality games, designed to test the mettle of their future Starship commanders, were unlike anything Jorvac had ever encountered. He was tasked with observing one such simulation, a training module that tested the tactical thinking and decision-making skills of human children. The boy, Jordan, had been selected by the data analysts as a potential subject for observation due to his impressive performance in an earlier training scenario. Jorvac leaned forward, adjusting the settings on his console. The image before him flickered and shifted, and soon the scene materialized into a digital representation of space, a vast starry expanse with asteroid fields, nebulae, and distant planets. The human child, Jordan, sat in a small room on Earth, his face illuminated by the glow of the simulation's virtual interface. A Starship cockpit was projected around him, complete with flashing control panels, a view of the surrounding space, and the hum of machinery. The headset he wore appeared basic, even archaic compared to Jorvac's species technology, yet Jordan seemed entirely immersed. Jorvac's fingers hovered over the command controls, watching intently as Jordan's hands gripped the console with nervous energy. The simulation began, a fleet of simulated enemy ships appearing on the display. A voice, cold and artificial, called out the first challenge. Enemy fleet detected. Weapons engaged. Command, what are your orders? The child froze for a moment, eyes scanning the screen. Jorvac's brow furrowed. How would the child respond? His species had designed simulations like this for centuries, testing everything from strategic thinking to decision-making under pressure. Humans, Jorvac believed, lacked the necessary cognitive structure to adapt quickly in complex environments. They were instinctive creatures, prone to mistakes in moments of stress. This would be no different. But Jordan was already moving. With startling confidence, the child issued a set of commands. His fingers danced across the controls with precision, almost as though he were guided by something beyond the parameters of the game. A series of calculated maneuvers unfolded before Jorvac's eyes, the virtual starship weaving in and out of enemy fire, exploiting the terrain and using the asteroid field as cover. The human child had grasped something Jorvac hadn't anticipated. Strategy. Course change. Evade enemy fire. Jordan muttered to himself, his voice filled with a mix of focus and awe. He tapped a sequence of commands with no hesitation. The ship veered sharply, narrowly missing a devastating blast from a pursuing enemy fighter. Jorvac blinked, his heart rate increasing slightly as his mind processed what he was seeing. The child hadn't simply reacted, he'd anticipated. The ship's course was already altered before the enemy could fire, as if Jordan had predicted their next move. Jorvac's hands hovered over his console, analyzing the situation with newfound intensity. The simulation's AI, designed to counter human instincts, was now being outsmarted. The sheer unpredictability of the child's tactics left Jorvac stunned. This was not a normal response. The child wasn't relying on simple calculations or the traditional rules of engagement. He was improvising, making moves that seemed born of pure instinct and creative thinking. The Admiral's mind raced. Could it be? Was there more to humanity than he had assumed? He had to see more. With a voice as cold as the space around him, Jorvac ordered, "Increase data feed. I need to see the full trajectory of this simulation." The feed expanded, And for the first time in years, Jorvax felt something unfamiliar, an inkling of respect, though he would not yet allow himself to acknowledge it fully. He leaned in closer, captivated by the boy's every move. Something was unfolding in the simulation, something far beyond the simple mind of a human child. It was only the beginning, but Jorvax could already feel the stirrings of something larger. A deeper question lingered at the edge of his thoughts. What made humans so unpredictable? Could this small child, with his raw and unpolished intellect, hold the key to understanding a species that had long been dismissed as insignificant? Jorvax leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the screen. The game had only just started, but the question that would define humanity's future was already beginning to form in his mind. Could the human spirit prove more powerful than anything the Sci-Fi had ever known? Admiral Jorvax's eyes remained glued to the holographic display as Jordan's starship danced through the asteroid field. Jorvax had witnessed countless simulations, more than he could count, and yet something about this human child's performance struck him as unique, even bizarre. The child's instincts were unpredictable, and Jorvax found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the human species. The simulation's AI, calculating and precise, had begun to ramp up the difficulty. More enemy ships emerged from the blackness of space, their presence announced by blaring alarms and flashing red indicators. The surrounding void seemed to pulse with danger, each move more perilous than the last. Jorvax had seen simulations designed to overwhelm the bravest of commanders, but the human child was responding with an unexpected level of skill and grace. Enemy forces incoming. The simulation's AI voice announced, its tone clinical and detached. Battle formation initiated. Do you wish to engage, Commander? Jordan didn't hesitate. His hands moved with purpose, his fingers pressing commands into the holographic console with practiced ease. His brow furrowed as the ship's shields flickered briefly under the barrage of enemy fire. Jorvax could feel the tension rise. The AI-controlled enemies were now overwhelming Jordan's fleet, forcing him into a desperate situation. This was the part of the simulation where human commanders usually faltered, when the odds were stacked too high, when fear took hold and strategy was abandoned in favor of survival. Jorvax prepared himself for the inevitable failure. He had seen it countless times. Humans were driven by emotion, often reactive rather than proactive. When faced with impossible odds, they could either freeze or make reckless decisions out of fear. It was in their nature. But Jordan did something unexpected. Instead of retreating or abandoning his mission, the boy issued a series of swift commands. Jorvax's eyes widened as Jordan's ship twisted and accelerated in a way the simulation's AI hadn't prepared for. Rather than firing blindly, the child used the environment, an asteroid field, and manipulated it in ways that shouldn't have been possible in a mere simulation. He had his ship dive into the dense clusters of floating rocks, using them as a shield, making the enemy's targeting systems malfunction and causing confusion among the pursuers. Course adjustment, Jordan muttered under his breath, adjusting the ship's velocity, using terrain to block fire. Jorvax was intrigued. The child had essentially outmaneuvered an AI program designed to be perfect. The simulation wasn't just a training ground, it was a battlefield with clear rules, and Jordan was rewriting those rules with sheer ingenuity. It wasn't about force or advanced weapons. It was about utilizing the available resources and thinking in ways the AI hadn't anticipated. Jordan's hands moved faster now, almost a blur of focused energy. Jorvax's data feeds hummed as he ran deeper calculations, but even with his superior processing power, he couldn't predict Jordan's next move. The boy seemed to make decisions without a formula, as if instinctively sensing the best course of action. Another enemy ship closed in, the battle's outcome looking more certain by the second. Jordan's starship was nearing the edge of the asteroid field, and the enemy's energy beams were locking on. The AI's next move was imminent. But instead of attempting to dodge or retreat, Jordan made an unprecedented move. He angled his ship directly into the line of fire. Jorvax felt his pulse quicken as Jordan ordered a full charge toward the approaching enemy. "Full power to the engines," Jordan said, his voice steady despite the pressure. "Engage evasive thrusters. Flank them." The human child wasn't running from danger. He was charging toward it. Jorvax's mind raced to process what was unfolding. He had seen tactics that relied on superior numbers or technological advantage. But what Jordan was doing defied the very principles of strategy Jorvax understood. It was bold, reckless, yet strangely brilliant. The human child was combining the most basic of survival instincts, fight or flight, with a kind of calculated madness. The result was chaos for the enemy. In a flash, Jordan's ship burst through the enemy's defensive lines, breaking their formation and scattering their fleet. Jorvax's eyes widened. The simulation's eye wasn't designed for this kind of disruption. It couldn't account for a tactic this unorthodox. Enemy ships disabled. Victory achieved, the AI voice stated flatly, its tone unchanged despite the overwhelming complexity of the victory. Jorvax's fingers trembled slightly as he switched his data feed to show a detailed map of the simulation. Jordan's starship had sustained heavy damage, but the enemy had been destroyed. The child had done the impossible. Jorvax sat back in his chair, a quiet sense of awe replacing his initial skepticism. This wasn't a lucky break or an anomaly. The child's victory was a direct result of his ability to think beyond the confines of the simulation, something even Jorvax's own species would struggle to replicate. Jordan had managed to defeat a far superior enemy by throwing out the conventional rules of engagement and embracing pure, raw creativity. For the first time, Jorvax found himself truly considering what made humans different from every other species he had studied. It wasn't their technology, not in the conventional sense, nor their military strength. It was something deeper, an unpredictable quality, an innate brilliance that was impossible to quantify. And as the simulation ended, Jorvax couldn't help but wonder, could this be the true strength of humanity? Admiral Jorvax sat still in his chair, his gaze fixed on the flickering image of Jordan's victorious starship. The silence in his command center was profound, punctuated only by the quiet hum of alien machinery. Jorvax's mind raced. The child had done the unthinkable. He had not only survived but won, using tactics that defied the very nature of the simulation itself. Jorvax had seen species rise and fall in the galaxy, had watched countless military simulations played out in training rooms and command centers. But this was different. Humanity's instinct to survive, their creativity in battle, was something he had not anticipated. A soft beep sounded from his control console, interrupting his thoughts. His data feed had completed an initial analysis of the simulation. He blinked, then leaned forward, accessing the report. He was looking for patterns, trying to dissect what had just transpired. Was it a fluke? A lucky sequence of events? Or was there something about Jordan's decision-making that was fundamentally different from every other species Jorvax had studied? He analyzed Jordan's movements, his responses to the simulated environment. The child had managed to manipulate every aspect of the situation, using the terrain to his advantage, predicting enemy moves, and even sacrificing elements of his fleet to achieve victory. The tactics Jordan employed were unconventional, creative, and utterly unpredictable. Jorvax found no algorithm, no data point that could explain it. It was as if Jordan had rewritten the simulation entirely, bypassing the game's AI and introducing his own set of principles. Impossible, Jorvax muttered under his breath. He ran the data again, adjusting the parameters, but it remained the same. Jordan had defied all the rules. The simulation was designed to test a human's ability to perform under pressure, to follow tactical guidelines, and to make logical decisions in combat. But Jordan wasn't following any of these parameters. Instead, the child seemed to be playing with the simulation, as though it were a toy to be bent and reshaped at will. Jorvax had never encountered a being who could so easily circumvent a system designed by one of the galaxy's most advanced technologies. "Recalculate the variables," Jorvax commanded, his voice low and steady. A new analysis began to run, this one more detailed than the last. As the report processed, Jorvax's fingers drummed lightly on the armrests. His mind worked quickly, drawing comparisons to other species he had studied. Even the most intelligent species, those capable of manipulating their environments, relied on established rules, algorithms, learned tactics, and strategies that followed a linear, predictable path. But Jordan didn't follow any of that. He was thinking outside the system entirely. Jorvax had seen this behavior before in a few species, rare but undeniable. It was a form of ingenuity that couldn't be modeled, not easily understood, and certainly not replicated by machines. Humans, Jorvax now realized, weren't bound by the same constraints that governed other species. They didn't merely react to situations, they reshaped them, as though the very fabric of reality could be altered with the right combination of instinct and willpower. As the recalculations completed, Jorvax leaned closer to the screen. His eyes scanned the analysis again. But this time, something stood out. Jordan's decisions weren't random or chaotic. They followed a pattern, one that Jorvax could identify if only he dug deep enough. There was an underlying structure to Jordan's creativity, a method to his madness. It wasn't pure chance. No, the child's decisions were informed by something deeper, something intuitive. Jorvax's fingers hovered over the command interface. He ran another simulation, one that mirrored Jordan's choices, but with his own variables. A fleet of advanced Selfar warships pitted against Jordan's Starship and its few surviving crew members. He watched closely, as if trying to force the answer into existence. For the first time, Jorvax realized that humans had an ability no amount of technology or strategy could account for. They didn't just adapt to their environment. They reinvented it. "Interesting," Jorvax murmured, his eyes narrowing. He had seen human ingenuity before in various forms, from their creations in the arts to their rapid evolution of technology. But this was something else. This wasn't about simply solving problems. It was about creating new rules to approach challenges, not just reacting to them, but reshaping the way they were understood in the first place. Jorvax leaned back in his chair, a sense of realization washing over him. His species had always valued cold logic, reason, and calculation. They had prided themselves on their precision. But humans, it seemed, did not operate on those principles alone. Jordan's success was not simply the result of technical skill. It was the result of something far more profound. He allowed himself a rare moment of contemplation. Could this unpredictability, this sheer creativity, be what made humanity so dangerous? The implications were clear. Humanity was not merely a species to be studied from a distance. They were a species to be watched, understood, and perhaps even respected. Jorvax knew this would change the direction of his mission and his perception of the human race. Forever. The simulation had shifted again, and this time, the odds were clearly not in Jordan's favor. Jorvax watched intently as the young boy faced a new scenario, a massive alien fleet, vast, powerful, and overwhelming. The screen flickered, and dozens of enemy ships emerged from the darkness, their sleek forms cutting through space with precision. The simulation's artificial intelligence voice intoned with its usual monotone detachment. Hostile alien fleet detected. Multiple ships. Weapons engage. Your fleet is outnumbered. Jorvax's focus sharpened as Jordan's Starship appeared on the screen, a lone vessel now facing impossible odds. The AI's calculated move had placed Jordan in a dire situation. The boy's fleet was nearly wiped out, leaving only his command ship intact. It was a scenario designed to test the very limits of human decision-making. Jorvax had watched this simulation play out countless times, expecting one of two results. The human commander would either surrender in fear or make a desperate, doomed attempt at survival. Jorvax leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He expected Jordan to panic, perhaps freeze, or make a rash, desperate move. The simulation's eye was a perfect tool for calculating these kinds of emotional responses. Humans, for all their creativity, could be predictable when faced with overwhelming fear or defeat. But Jordan's reaction was different from what Jorvax anticipated. The boy's hands hovered over the console, his fingers twitching with indecision. For a moment, his face appeared to waver, a hint of hesitation crossing his features. His starship was trapped. There was no escape. Jorvax could sense the weight of the moment pressing down on Jordan's shoulders, the immense pressure of facing an unbeatable enemy. The boy's calmness was unnerving. Then, without warning, Jordan gave a quiet, almost imperceptible command. Power to shields. Full evasive maneuvers. Jorvax's brow furrowed as he observed Jordan's ship. It had been battered, its hull cracked and smoking from earlier engagements, and yet the boy didn't retreat or surrender. Instead, he maneuvered his ship into a narrow gap between two large asteroids, hoping the incoming enemy fleet would be distracted by the terrain. The odds were long. The enemy fleet wasn't just superior in numbers, but in firepower as well. Jorvax knew what would happen next. The AI would find the weakest point in Jordan's defense and strike. The human ship would be destroyed in minutes. There was no way around it. But to Jorvax's surprise, Jordan didn't flinch. Instead, the boy took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing with a quiet determination. He issued one last command. Redirect all power to forward shields. Weapons, prepare for a full frontal assault. Jorvax was taken aback. Jordan was doing something no sane commander would attempt. He was preparing to charge into the heart of the enemy's overwhelming force, knowing full well that the enemy was superior in every way. It was a reckless gamble, a decision that defied all conventional military strategy. And yet there was something so utterly human about it. The boy was not simply resigning to defeat. He was choosing to fight, no matter the cost. The enemy fleet closed in, weapons charging, preparing for the kill. The tension was unbearable, even for Jorvax. He had seen countless simulations before, but this felt different. The boy had nothing left to lose, and yet he fought with the heart of a warrior, the very spirit of defiance. As the first shots were fired, Jordan's starship surged forward, its shields absorbing the brutal barrage of enemy fire. But Jorvax knew it wouldn't last. The ship's energy reserves were running out, and the enemy was closing in. In the final moments before the end, as the enemy unleashed their full firepower, Jordan's ship was struck head-on. Jorvax felt a pang of something. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't even pity. It was a recognition of something deeper, something no eye could account for. The simulation ended abruptly. The screen went dark, and Jorvax's console chimed. The simulation's AI voice coldly reported. Simulation failed. Your fleet has been destroyed. Jorvax didn't move. The words simulation failed echoed in his mind, but they didn't carry the weight of a typical failure. Something had changed in that last moment. The child had fought until the very end, even when every logical part of him should have chosen survival over defiance. His starship was gone, but the spirit behind the move, Jordan's refusal to bow to fate, lingered in the air, palpable and undeniable. Jorvax sat back, his mind processing the significance of what had just unfolded. The human child had lost the simulation, but he had not failed. No, in that moment, Jordan had shown Jorvax something crucial. It was not just about winning or losing, but about how one faced the odds. Even in the face of total defeat, the child had chosen to fight, to challenge the overwhelming power of the enemy, not with logic, but with sheer will. Jorvax's thoughts lingered on the outcome. This was not the outcome the simulation had predicted. This was something new, something that made him rethink everything he had assumed about humanity. It wasn't the victory that mattered. It was the relentless refusal to give up, no matter the circumstances. And in that defeat, Jorvax saw the true strength of humanity. The hum of Jorvax's console filled the air as the Admiral continued to stare at the now empty simulation screen. The defeat of Jordan's Starship was undeniable. The simulation's cold, detached voice had declared the failure, and yet Jorvax found himself feeling a strange reverence for the boy's actions. The outcome had been expected. His ship had been utterly destroyed, and the enemy had emerged victorious. But it wasn't the destruction that lingered in Jorvax's mind. It was the defiance. Jorvax had never witnessed a human fight like that before. Most of the species he had encountered, when facing such overwhelming odds, would have chosen to surrender or flee. But Jordan's response had been a deliberate act of rebellion against fate itself, and the choice had been made without hesitation. The boy had taken the final blow without a second thought of surrender. Jorvax leaned back in his chair, fingers tracing the edge of the armrest as his thoughts swirled. His mind kept returning to one word: resilience. Jordan had exhibited something that transcended mere tactical genius or clever improvisation. It was something raw, unquantifiable, a refusal to give in to the circumstances, to let the weight of an impossible situation dictate the outcome. He had fought, not for victory, but because it was his nature to never accept defeat without a final act of defiance. It was a quality that Jorvax had never fully understood in humans. His own species, the Sci-Fi, valued reason, strategy, and the calculated odds of success. They thrived on the belief that control over one's environment, through intellect and precision, was the true path to dominance. The idea of throwing away one's advantage, of choosing to fight against inevitable odds for the sake of principle, had always seemed wasteful, almost foolish. Yet here, watching Jordan's final act in the simulation, Jorvax saw that there was something more. This human child had embraced the battle, not out of a hope for survival, but because the very act of fighting was what made him human. The loss of his fleet, his ship, none of it had mattered to Jordan in the moment. What mattered was the refusal to bow before the inevitable. Jorvax's eyes narrowed as he analyzed Jordan's final moments. He had watched his own people face defeat many times, and their responses had always been the same: retreat, regroup, or surrender. Their focus was always on survival, on staying alive. But Jordan had chosen to fight. His tactics, though flawed, had been based on something entirely human. A belief that, even when the universe itself seemed stacked against him, he could make a difference, even if only for a brief moment. The thought lingered in Jorvax's mind like a faint echo. The question that followed was one he wasn't sure he wanted to answer. What made humans so relentless? Jorvax's fingers moved instinctively to the data feed again. He pulled up a secondary simulation, one that would examine the root of Jordan's tactics. It was time to understand the decision-making process that had led the boy to his final act. He needed to dissect it, to figure out how this child's mind worked. What drove him to act the way he did? What was it about humans that made them so unyielding, even in the face of certain death? The data analysis began to run. Jorvax studied it carefully, his thoughts moving in tandem with the display. As he looked at the patterns in Jordan's choices, something slowly became clear. The child's actions had not been impulsive or reckless. They were based on one core principle: hope. Even when the situation seemed utterly hopeless, Jordan had chosen to act as though there was always a chance, no matter how slim, for something to change. Jorvax's mind drifted back to his own species. The Sci-Fi were calculated beings, focused on precision and certainty. Every action had a cause and effect, every decision made with the knowledge of the outcome. They valued control. Humans, on the other hand, seemed to embrace uncertainty, even in the face of overwhelming danger. Hope, Jorvax mused. It was an emotion his species had long abandoned in favor of cold logic. The very idea of choosing action over inaction, of embracing uncertainty and continuing to fight, felt alien to him. He sighed, adjusting the feed. The calculation suggested that Jordan's tactics had been rooted in a profound emotional intelligence. It wasn't about just surviving. It was about continuing to fight, because it mattered, no matter the odds. A small, almost imperceptible change rippled through Jorvax's thoughts. He had always considered his species to be the most advanced, the most prepared to dominate the galaxy. But here, now, in this quiet moment of reflection, he found himself wondering, could the resilience of humanity be more powerful than pure intellect and strategy? For the first time, Jorvax was left with more questions than answers. And as the simulation ended and the data began to reset, a new realization began to form. Humanity had something that the Sci-Fi, and many others, lacked. It wasn't their technology or their military prowess. It was something far more dangerous. The unyielding will to fight, even when the battle was already lost. The spirit of humanity itself. And in that, Jorvax found something to respect. Something to fear. Jorvax sat in his command chair, staring at the holographic feeds that floated before him. The simulation had ended, but the scene replayed itself in his mind. Jordan's final decision to fight, despite the overwhelming odds, had left an imprint on his thoughts. He had been trained to observe, to analyze, to understand. And yet, in the case of humanity, he felt as though he was standing at the edge of a vast chasm of mystery, unsure of how to proceed. The data analysis had run for hours now, breaking down the details of Jordan's actions. The patterns were clear. Jordan's tactics were based on emotion, an emotional intelligence that Jorvax couldn't quite comprehend. It wasn't just the will to survive or to win, as Jorvax had originally thought. No, it was more profound. It was about purpose. It was about the unwavering belief that, even in the darkest moments, there was meaning to be found in the struggle. As Jorvax reviewed the footage again, the child's voice echoed in his mind, a soft but firm murmur. Full power to shields, full frontal assault. It was as if the boy had been determined to stand against the tide of fate itself. Jorvax had seen military tactics based on survival, based on preserving the resources of a fleet, on avoiding unnecessary casualties. But Jordan's approach was something else entirely. It was raw, personal, and impossible to quantify. Jorvax's mind wandered back to the central question that had been plaguing him. Why? Why did humans fight like this? His people, the Sci-Fi, were beings of logic. Every decision, every move in a battle had to be calculated to maximize efficiency, to ensure victory. Their success was based on understanding patterns, predicting outcomes, and preparing for every possibility. But humanity seemed to defy this order. A sudden thought struck Jorvax. He had once read an ancient text, something from Earth, back when humanity had first begun to explore the stars. The text had referred to a human concept called resilience. It was a term that Jorvax had brushed off as a fleeting emotion, something irrelevant to strategy. But now, after seeing Jordan's actions firsthand, he realized how deeply this idea ran through the human psyche. It wasn't just about resilience in the face of adversity. It was about fighting for the sake of fighting, even when the battle was already lost. The will to endure, to keep moving forward despite overwhelming despair. Jorvax's eyes narrowed as he considered this. Humans didn't just react to threats. They confronted them. Even when they had no chance of success, they chose to stand firm. This was a concept that Jorvax could not easily grasp. It went against everything he knew about power, about survival, about efficiency. For a moment, Jorvax allowed himself to think back to his own people. The Sci-Fi. They had never faced such a test of will. Their society had always been based on the preservation of life, the maximization of potential through calculated decision-making. Their leaders were chosen for their ability to weigh every factor, to predict every outcome with cold, unfeeling precision. There was little room for the sort of chaotic, irrational behavior that seemed to define humanity's approach to conflict. Jorvax leaned back, his mind momentarily drifting. It was then that he realized something. In his pursuit of understanding humanity, he had overlooked one fundamental truth. It wasn't that humans were illogical or inefficient. It was that they didn't need to be efficient, not in the way he understood it. Humans, in their own way, operated from a place of passion. It was their capacity for emotion, hope, fear, love, and the relentless drive to protect that gave them an edge no strategy could account for. He stared at the empty simulation interface, a quiet sense of awe creeping in. Jorvax had seen countless species, each one more advanced in some way than the last. Yet none had shown him the power of the human spirit. None had displayed the ability to push forward, to fight on, when everything else had failed. It was a strange thought, almost one that Jorvax would have rejected outright. Could this be what makes humanity dangerous? Before he could fully process the implications, a transmission pinged across his console. He shifted in his chair, his focus snapping back to the here and now. The transmission was from the Sulfar High Command, a report on his progress. The words that appeared on his screen were efficient, succinct. Admiral Jorvax, report on human analysis and potential threat level. Jorvax's fingers hovered over the response command. What should he say? How could he quantify what he had seen? How could he explain that what he had witnessed in Jordan's decision-making process was not just a failure in logic, but a strength that could not be predicted or understood? He thought for a moment. Finally, with a sense of resolve, Jorvax typed his response. Humanity's greatest strength is not in their technology, nor in their ability to predict the future. It is in their refusal to yield. Even in the face of certain defeat, they will choose to fight. Jorvax paused, then added a final line, one that was more of a warning than a statement. Underestimate this, and you may find yourselves at the mercy of their unpredictable will. He sent the message and sat back, his mind still turning. The High Command would likely dismiss his words as hyperbole, but Jorvax knew better. Humans, it seemed, had a power none of them could fully comprehend. The Admiral of the Sulfar had just come face to face with something far more dangerous than the might of their fleets or their technology. The boundless, unyielding power of human resilience. Jorvax stood before the viewport of his command ship, watching the vast expanse of space unfold before him. The stars twinkled in their familiar patterns, seemingly indifferent to the turmoil of the universe. Yet his mind was far from peaceful. His recent analysis of humanity, specifically Jordan's actions in the simulation, had left him restless. There was something about that resilience, that refusal to accept defeat, that gnawed at him. It was something new, something unexpected. It was a quality Jorvax had never thought to account for in his strategies. The Sulfar, like most advanced species, had always relied on data, on patterns, on the predictable outcomes of calculated moves. It was how they conquered, how they thrived. But humanity, in all its chaos and unpredictability, had shaken that foundation. Jordan had fought, not because he thought he could win, but because he refused to let go of the fight. It wasn't just about strategy, it was about spirit. It was a new kind of power. He turned from the viewport, his gaze settling on the empty conference table before him. The High Command's message had arrived earlier, demanding a full report on his observations of the human species. But Jorvax found himself unable to provide a clear answer. The calculations he had worked through were incomplete. They failed to capture what was at the core of humanity's strength. The more he considered Jordan's actions, the more Jorvax realized he couldn't define it. This unyielding persistence wasn't a flaw, nor was it something to be exploited or destroyed. It was an asset, a force in itself. He had watched the boy's Starship burn, and yet, even as the hull shattered and systems failed, Jordan had chosen to fight. Even when survival was impossible, he had fought. That instinct for resistance, to never give up, was at the core of human strength. A quiet chime from his console interrupted his thoughts. Jorvax walked over and activated the transmission. It was a message from his intelligence officers, further analysis on the human resistance movements across the galaxy. The data was raw, fragmented, but it told a story. Human colonies, often on the edge of destruction, were resisting not through superior firepower, but by outlasting their opponents. They were known for guerrilla tactics, for striking when least expected, for holding on to a fight when others would have long surrendered. Jorvax absorbed the information, but he couldn't stop thinking about the most important revelation. Humanity's resilience wasn't just about one-on-one combat. It was in their very way of living. Every failure, every hardship, only seemed to fuel their desire to push further. There was no quitting for them, no give-up button, and that made them dangerous. It became clear to Jorvax that the Selfar and every other species he'd studied had underestimated this. Victory was always supposed to be determined by numbers, by strength, by technological superiority. Humanity, it seemed, had turned that equation upside down. How can you defeat a species that refuses to be defeated? Jorvax's mind raced as he shifted through the data, trying to adapt his own strategies. This wasn't something that could be conquered with force alone. If the Selfar were to move forward with their plans of domination, they would have to rethink their approach. There was no clear path to victory if their enemies refused to follow the rules of engagement. Admiral Jorvax, the voice from his communication system, snapped him out of his thoughts. It was his top strategist, Director Vexeth. He had been expecting her. "Yes, Director." Jorvax responded, trying to steady his thoughts. "We've reviewed the data on human resistance movements," Vexeth continued. "The analysis is, as you predicted, incomplete. But there's something new we've discovered. These humans don't just fight. They adapt. In every situation, no matter how dire, they find a way to turn the odds in their favor. It's not their technology. It's not their tactics. It's their sheer will to continue." Jorvax felt a tightening in his chest as he processed her words. She was right. But that knowledge only deepened the sense of unease he had been feeling. His species had long been proud of their ability to predict and control, but this new realization made everything feel uncertain. And uncertainty was something Jorvax had never been comfortable with. "What do you propose, Director?" Jorvax asked, his voice even but laced with the weight of this new understanding. Vexeth hesitated for a moment. "We need to reevaluate our approach. The usual strategies, direct conquest, overwhelming force, may not be enough. If we truly wish to bring humanity under control, we'll need to find a way to break their will. But we must be cautious. If we push too hard, too quickly, they may simply rise up again, stronger." Jorvax's mind whirred with possibilities. To truly break the spirit of humanity, he realized, would not be easy. It wouldn't be about overwhelming them with force. It would be about understanding them. How could you defeat something that had no concept of surrender? For the first time in his long career, Jorvax felt uncertain. And it was this uncertainty that made him realize something else. The real battle for the future of the galaxy was not just about strategy or firepower. It was about understanding the human spirit. And that was something that could not be easily quantified, nor easily defeated. "Very well," Jorvax said slowly, his voice firm. "Prepare a new strategy. We will engage humanity, but not as we have before. We will observe, we will adapt, and we will find a way to break their resolve. And we will not make the mistake of underestimating their resilience again." As Vexeth acknowledged the order and the transmission ended, Jorvax felt the weight of his responsibility more than ever. The universe was on the brink of something far greater than conquest. He now faced a challenge that no amount of military might could overcome. He was about to engage in the most difficult battle of all, understanding humanity. And for the first time, he wasn't sure who would win. Jorvax stood in the quiet of his command chamber, the galaxy stretching out before him through the viewport. His mind, ever analytical, now grappled with the true complexity of humanity. No longer was the idea of defeating them purely a matter of strategy or brute force. The boy, Jordan, and the countless other human fighters across the galaxy had shown him something that no amount of tactical training could have prepared him for. Humanity was not just a species to be beaten. They were a force to be reckoned with, driven by something deeper than mere survival. They were driven by something indomitable. Jorvax had spent decades in the pursuit of knowledge, refining his understanding of the universe and the species within it. He had encountered countless forms of life, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, their own ways of adapting to the ever-present pressures of survival. But the humans, they defied logic in a way he had never witnessed before. Where others would surrender, they'd fought. Where others would retreat, they advanced. Jorvax's gaze drifted to the data terminal beside him, where a new message had just arrived. The High Command was growing impatient. They expected a resolution, a clear directive on how to proceed with the campaign against humanity. Their patience was running thin. To them, it was all about time. The longer they waited, the more power the humans would amass. They needed a solution, and they needed it now. Jorvax's fingers hovered over the screen, torn between his duty to his species and the overwhelming weight of what he had come to understand about humanity. If he chose to advise the High Command on a direct approach, humanity would likely fight harder than they ever had before. But if he didn't, if he failed to act decisively, the Excelfar risked losing their position in the galaxy. It was a dangerous precipice, and one that Jorvax could not ignore. For the first time in his career, Jorvax questioned the methods of his people. How many battles had the Excelfar won through sheer might alone? How many times had they silenced their enemies with overwhelming force? It had always been effective. It had always brought them victory. But now, when faced with a foe who refused to bend, refused to accept defeat, Jorvax found himself uncertain. He thought back to the last simulation, to Jordan's unyielding spirit. The boy had not cared about victory. He hadn't fought to win. He had fought because that was the nature of humans. To endure, to keep going even when all seemed lost. In that moment, Jordan had reminded Jorvax of something that Excelfar had forgotten. Victory was not just about the end result. It was about the journey, the fight itself. A sharp ping interrupted his musings. It was another message from the High Command, insistent and demanding. Jorvax's jaw clenched. Time was running out. If he didn't act soon, the galaxy would be forced into a war that could consume everything. Could humanity's relentless defiance be a weakness? Or perhaps it was something more, a new kind of strength, one that could change the fabric of the galaxy itself. Jorvax knew that no matter the path he chose, there would be consequences. If he pushed forward with the Excelfar's typical strategy, overwhelming force, humanity would be crushed, but at a steep price. The spirit of humanity could not be destroyed by sheer firepower alone. If anything, it might fuel them even more. But if he tried to understand them, to engage them differently, there was a chance, a small but real chance, that the Excelfar could form a new kind of alliance, one that valued endurance over destruction, one that respected humanity's resilience. Jorvax's gaze softened as he considered the faces of the humans he had observed, Jordan, and the many others who had fought against the odds. He realized, in that moment, that humanity's greatest weapon was not their fleets or their technology. It was their ability to withstand anything that the galaxy could throw at them. With a deep breath, Jorvax made his decision. He pressed the button on his console, initiating the transmission back to the High Command. The words he typed were measured, each one carrying the weight of a profound shift in perspective. It was a proposal that would change everything. The Excelfar would not invade humanity with the usual force. They would attempt something far more challenging. Understanding. High Command. He typed, I propose a new approach. We must not destroy humanity through force. We must find a way to coexist with them. Their resilience is not a weakness, but a strength. If we are to succeed, we must recognize the value of their spirit. A different path must be taken. We need to engage, not conquer. Jorvax sat back, his fingers trembling slightly. The message was sent. He could already hear the voices of the High Command's leaders in his mind. Their protests, their demands for results. But for the first time, Jorvax was willing to stand by his choice. As the stars continued to shine outside his command chamber, Jorvax realized something that had eluded him for years. Victory was not always about domination. Sometimes it was about respecting your opponent, understanding them in a way that no force could shatter. And with that, Jorvax waited for the galaxy's next move.